when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine war. And while many in the world are absolutely watching this extremely closely, there is no doubt that certain countries are taking notes and actually adjusting their plans as all of this unfolds. Most notably would be China, which for a long time has been having their eyes on Taiwan. So, what might China and maybe other countries be taking away from what's been happening with President Trump over the last few days? We're here to discuss this and more is Gordon Chang. He's a senior fellow at the Gatestone Institute and author of Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America. And by the way, you can follow him on X at the handle at Gordon G. Chang. Gordon, always great to have you on Washington Watch. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Jody.
All right, listen, before we get into China, which I definitely want to get into that, I want to just get your overall assessment as to what's been unfolding the last few days with regard to Russia and Ukraine. What do you make of all that President Trump has been doing?
Well, President Trump has been moving at Trump speed. I mean, we have seen extraordinary developments occur so close to each other. So, for instance, on Friday, of course, you had our president in Alaska talking to Vladimir Putin. And then just over the weekend, he arranged and put together the meeting on Monday, which was extraordinary. Not only was there Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, but also you had the heads of the most important institutions and countries in Western Europe. And that's really interesting because we haven't seen that before. So things are moving fast, and I suppose we'll see a trilateral meeting, Russia, China, and Ukraine, in the very near future.
Yeah, I think describing it at Trump speed is very, very just spot on how to describe it. But it is remarkable what's going on. And within that context, Gordon, I wanted to get your thoughts on China. Of course, you're such an expert on China, but there's long been speculation about China's intentions to invade Taiwan. So when you look at what's happening now with Russia and Ukraine and Trump's involvement with that, what do you think China is paying attention to right now as it watches what's unfolding with this administration and Russia and Ukraine?
There are two things. First of all, I think that the Chinese are looking at what an eventual settlement will be. And if Russia gets to keep Ukrainian territory, either annexing it or just merely controlling it, I think the Chinese are going to take away a very, very bad lesson, which is you can go and invade neighbors, break them apart, and then keep the parts because the West will not exercise the vigor and determination necessary. So I really worry that we might be opening the door to conflict in East Asia. The second thing, and this is a problem as well, and that is President Trump, to his great credit, imposed the 25% additional tariff on India for buying Russian oil. That was August 6th. But China buys more Russian oil than India, and so far there's been no additional tariff on China for doing that. And the Chinese are probably thinking that they are immune to pressure from the United States. We know that the Chinese have been telling everybody privately and sometimes openly that the United States is finished and that China runs the world now. And something like not imposing the 25% tariff on China only makes China's case. So I hope that President Trump reverses that and actually imposes those costs on Beijing.
Two very, very good points. So as we look at China and the points that you just laid out, how they are adjusting plans probably based on what the Trump administration is doing right now. Are there other countries as well? China certainly is the 800-pound gorilla, so to speak, in the room, but are other countries right now watching as well before they determine what their next move may be somewhere in the world?
Yeah, I think both China and North Korea want this war to continue. North Korea wants it to continue because they are making a lot of money from this. They've been selling short-range ballistic missiles, artillery shells, and they've been providing soldiers. Up to 12,800 so far, plus another 30,000 perhaps in the works, along with additional combat engineers and regular workers. South Korean intelligence estimates that Russia pays North Korea $2,000 per month per soldier. Some people believe that figure is less, but the North Koreans, whatever that number is, making a lot of money. So I think the North Koreans want to see this war continue. And so do the Chinese. And that's very clear because Wang Yi, the Chinese foreign minister, told Kaja Kallas, the EU foreign policy chief, on July 2nd, that China does not want to see Russia lose, because if Russia loses, then the U.S. will be able to focus on China in East Asia. And that means if the war ends, even with a Russian victory, the U.S. will still be able to focus on China in East Asia. So I think the Chinese want to see this war continue, and so do the North Koreans. And by the way, I should say the Iranians are probably in the same category because they sell drones and other stuff to Russia. So everybody's making a lot of money off of this conflict.
Very interesting. Moving back to China, within the context of what you were just talking about, many people may not be aware that China, even right now, has a role in this Russia war against Ukraine. Can you kind of take us down that path and describe for us more about China's role with what's happening there in Ukraine and Russia?
Yeah, China's been providing all-in support. It green-lighted the invasion with that February 4th, 2022 joint statement with Vladimir Putin about the all no-limits partnership. And then you had, from the very beginning, China was providing military intelligence to the Russians. They were opening up their financial system to sanctioned Russian institutions. There's been diplomatic support, propaganda support, the elevated commodity purchases, which we've just talked about. And also, China has soldiers in Ukraine right now. There are perhaps as many as 200 mercenaries. Those mercenaries couldn't have gotten to the Russian front without the approval of Beijing. But there are also formal People's Liberation Army officers at the front as well. We assume that they're just observers or advisors, but this is all in support, Jody. China is providing just about everything to Russia, and we have not imposed costs on China for doing that. We talk about it all the time, saying you can't do this, you can't do that, but we don't do anything about it, so the Chinese just ignore us. And when they ignore us, that means our warnings to them on other things are probably going to be ignored. And that's a very bad development.
Yeah, it really is. So what's in this for China? Why are they so supportive of Russia? What are they getting back out of it? And why do they want Russia to invade Ukraine?
There's a lot of things going on here. One of them is, as Wang Yi said, he basically wants the U.S. diverted. But we got to remember that Xi Jinping reveres Mao Zedong, the founder of the People's Republic. And Mao talked about chaos, that chaos would eventually lead to worldwide Chinese rule. And I believe that Xi Jinping has been sowing chaos around the world. And it's not just the war in Ukraine, it's also the insurgencies in North Africa that look like wars. It's backing Iran's attack on Israel. China backs the Houthis, Hezbollah, and Hamas. So basically, Beijing wants to disrupt the world because they believe that the destruction of societies are just way stations to Xi Jinping's basically direct rule of all of the world. And by the way, Jody, the Chinese not only talk about the whole world should be ruled by China, but they're now talking about the moon and Mars as sovereign Chinese territory. So we're talking about the most ambitious aggressor in history. So this is not just about Ukraine. This is about the United States, because the Chinese think of the United States as at best, a mere colony of China.
Wow. So that's fascinating when you look at it from that perspective. Let me ask you this. I wanted to switch gears, but based on what you just said, you have been on here before talking about really the vulnerability of the Chinese economy right now. How serious is that? And I would think, as serious as it seems to be, that sanctions, if we were to take some of the moves that you suggest we probably ought to take against China, that really could be devastating.
Yes, well, China claims 5.2% GDP growth in the second quarter of this year. I think, and we don't know, Jody, but I think there's probably about zero. Maybe a little bit above, maybe a little bit below. but we're seeing some very distressing signs from the Chinese economy. Two things: price data. It shows that China's in a deflationary spiral already and has been for quite some time. And a deflationary spiral is extremely difficult to get out of, especially because Xi Jinping doesn't want to do those things that are absolutely necessary to get out of that deflationary spiral. The other thing, and this comes from last month, we saw a precipitous drop in bank lending. The reason why this is important is because it tells us that Chinese enterprises don't want to borrow. They don't want to borrow because they don't see a future. And that means the Chinese economy is headed downward. You know, these Chinese banks, these Chinese enterprises, they're all controlled by the Chinese central government and ultimately the Communist Party. And yet the party in this dictatorial one-party state can't force them to do what the party wants, which is a real indication that the Chinese economy has slipped beyond the control of the Chinese leadership.
So that really brings us into what some could probably justifiably describe as yet another war, and that would be the trade war between China and the United States. And you've alluded significantly about that. What's your assessment as to how that is unfolding and where it needs to go in the future?
Well, we're in this 90-day pause that lasts through the beginning of November 9th, where we and China do not impose tariffs, which are elevated above 100%. Right now, this is normally it would benefit China because China would have more time to basically steal our intellectual property and also to engage in predatory trade practices. Also, China benefits because this is the Halloween and Christmas season that they get through. But this time, I think delay sort of helps the United States. And the reason is that President Trump has been putting together these framework trade agreements with all sorts of countries: UK, EU, Indonesia, Japan, South Korea. And that is redirecting trade away from China. So the longer that this process goes on, the better it is for the United States in general. I'd like to see more robust action on the part of President Trump. I think this is the time that we start really defending our economy. I don't think we should be selling sophisticated computer chips to China, which the Trump administration is now doing. But, you know, all in all, I think this is going in the right direction.
So, what kind of predictions would you have looking ahead for China throughout the remainder of the Trump administration in particular? What do we look for the next 3 years?
Oh my gosh, what a question. I think that we basically look at the Chinese economy because the economy is deteriorating and the regime is not doing the right things to rescue itself. This is going to cause more trade friction because basically Xi Jinping's only remedy right now is to export more to the world. And the world just can't absorb these Chinese goods. We're also seeing hints of real instability at the top of the Chinese regime. There's a lot of disagreement among people who closely follow this, but I think that Xi Jinping has lost a lot of influence and maybe even control over the Chinese military. And he's lost some influence over China's civilian leadership. As I mentioned, there are other people who don't think that, but we are seeing signs that are not compatible with a stable regime. So I'm looking for what's going on inside Beijing. And it's very difficult to do that because the regime is opaque. But if you don't have a stable regime, then all bets are off, Jody. All bets are off.
So you seem to be suggesting, and we don't have time to get into this very much, but you seem to be suggesting at least the possibility of a regime change over the next few years?
Easily possible. Or we could see, if there isn't regime change, if there isn't a change in the nature of the political system, we could see a change in the people who run the Communist Party's system. So, you know, I think that all scenarios are possible right now. And that means it makes it very difficult for the rest of the world to deal with China, but it also makes it very difficult for China to deal constructively with the rest of the world. Because when leaders fight with each other, when everything is on the line, They can't deal with us in a way that we expect.
Well, there are so many things happening all around the world, and I know, Gordon, whenever China is in the mix, it's you're like the first person that comes to mind. We've got to talk to Gordon about this. I want to thank you so much for bringing to us your expertise as to what's happening specifically with China around the world. Gordon Chang, Senior Fellow, Gatestone Institute. As always, we're honored to have you here on Washington Watch.
Well, I'm honored to talk to you, Jody, so thank you very much.